Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of I Like to Read with me, your host, Rachel Polanski. Today, I am very, very excited to be joined by the lovely Claire Kells, who its name I actually found out is not Claire Kells. It's just a pen name, but her real name is Kathleen, so we may go interchangeably. She is the author of two best-selling novels, Girl Underwater and Vanishing Edge, which is part of a new National Parks mystery series. You're also a physician, right? You're not just an author. So she's got a lot to talk about, but thank you for joining us. If you want to talk a little bit more, maybe is that a good enough intro? Anything else that you want to let the listeners know before we delve into your works?
No, I'm just really excited to be here. Thank you so much, Rachel. I really enjoy your podcast, and I, just discovered it recently. So I have always been a big reader, and I'm just excited to talk about books and talk a little bit about mine and just see where things go. So thanks so much.
Yeah. So we'll start with Vanishing Edge, which is the one that came out most recently. That's the one that drew me to you. I actually, so Casey Rose Wilson, I didn't know that you were even related. I just follow her on Instagram, and I happened to look back today, and I just saw the post, and I just see a book on people's Instagram posts, and I'm like, wow, that looks good. I want to check it out. And then I just noticed today that you're related. So that's cool. So that's how I found you originally. So my first question is, there's a really intense sense of like mise en place and scenery that comes about in your novels. Like, I am not an outdoorsy person by any means, but the way in both of them, specifically Vanishing Place, how do you sort of research, how do you make that world come alive on the page? Because it's, clearly someone who, even if you're not outdoorsy yourself, knows a lot about those environments. And how do you almost evoke nature as another character in these novels?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure why I'm so drawn to the outdoors. I have been since the beginning with my first novel. I think it comes from a deeper place of always being a little bit scared of the outdoors and the woods. I just like every time I drive by the woods at night, I'm just like, that's just scary. I don't want to be anywhere near there. And so for me, like it just comes from a place of strong emotion. I feel like that's always a natural place for me to start in terms of everything I write. And then once I start writing, I really like to try and do a deep dive into the place. I mean, these places for me, I tend to go to actual places like national parks that actually exist. But then when you drill down into the details, a lot of it is just research. And, these parks are huge. And so you can't really get too specific on one particular location, but there's so much out there, just what people have done in terms of these crazy trips and their itineraries and so many details. So even if I haven't been to the specific place, I love to do a deep dive and look at the photographs. And of course, I've been to Tahoe National Forest many times. So I have that feeling of being in the sequoias, and I can certainly draw from that. So for me, I think it's definitely a combination of just an emotional attachment to the place and just a general love, like a genuine love of doing research and trying to just immerse myself in it.
Right. Because it's, interesting to do the research of a place as opposed to like research of, a historical time that may no longer exist, or like a character who may no longer exist. It evokes a certain feeling, which I definitely think comes across on the page. Like, I was very terrified the entire time. Like I said, I'm not an outdoorsy person. The idea of camping, I mean, the glamping service honestly sounds like something that I would probably, maybe not that extreme, but it is realistic, because there are plenty of people who don't like the outdoors and still have to deal with it. So what was, can you talk a little bit more about the decision to create these, these nuanced, complex characters, of course, exist in both the novels, but since this is a series, we're clearly going to be continuing to follow Felicity and Hux and their journey. Did it come before you started writing? Like, why did you decide to continue to follow these characters and let us know already sort of that it's going to be a continuing series? Did that come after it was published? Did that come when you first started? How did that evolve?
I mean, I think for me, like I've had kind of a circuitous journey of sorts from my first book to this one. And so when I was writing it, I wasn't envisioning a series particularly. I had written it initially as a psychological thriller set in the Bay Area. And then through multiple rounds of revisions, I did a complete kind of 180 on it. I mean, I scrapped like 70% of the novel, but I still had Harlan and Hux as the two main characters. So they held strong from the beginning, but the actual story itself and the mystery really changed dramatically. But I think for me, I love coming from a place of romance. I'm just kind of like a romantic. I mean, they're not romantic characters in this. I mean, there's some romantic tension, but I think I'm just drawn so much to relationships. I love that aspect of storytelling. And so even though it's certainly not an outright romance, I think what intrigued me was their dynamic and,
Mm-hmm.
what, as they're discovering their relationship, it's kind of a big part of the story. And I felt fortunate through my publisher when they had, acquired the one book that they wanted a second, and it gave me a chance to kind of explore their relationship a little bit more. So I think that was a nice way for it to come together because I really enjoyed the characters and I'm just excited to keep working with them.
Awesome. And they also, they deal with a lot of trauma, specifically PTSD. And how do you think, how did you decide to include that? What was sort of the process of coming to terms with PTSD, both, personally and, on the page? Like, and, I'm sure it comes from some sort of place within, how do you grapple with your own personal PTSD and trying to put that on the page as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I don't have a personal history with PTSD per se, but I've certainly,
we've all experienced, whether I
yeah.
think PTSD, in the larger sense, you don't have to have had a particular, inciting incident that has caused it, but we've all dealt with trauma in one way or another.
Completely true. That is completely right. I think, for me, I was just really drawn to PTSD as a diagnosis back when I was in medical school, just working with veterans who had dealt with that. And so I think that really informed my first book, Girl Underwater, just seeing how people recover from that. But you're right. I definitely have a unique fascination with trauma and how people recover from it. I think for me, it's just that interest in grit and what gets people through really tough times in their lives. Like, what defines you really? And I think if you can drill down into that, it's a really rich place to go for storytelling, because I just like looking into characters who are vulnerable and weak and but also strong and trying to recover from something that maybe they can't completely come to terms with or don't want to. And that's also something that I just like exploring through the story. And even for a mystery, I really like when the protagonist has an arc and you're kind of seeing them go from one place to the other rather than having them be the static person that solves the crime. I think for me, I just really love to see their journey and put them through some really tough times.
Definitely. I mean, I think that's, again, what major books stand out too, is I read a lot of thriller mystery books, and there are some where, the detective themselves is just sort of another plot device, like they're a character perhaps, but it's really not about their story, or their story kind of seems a little bit contrived. And with our main characters, it's like they wouldn't be there if it wasn't for their main story, and their main story is sort of what is in, as the case evolves, like they're evolving too. So that's what and even though your first book, the protagonist wasn't a detective, even, she's still piecing together her past, and she's still, having to decipher a lot of stuff within herself too. So you don't necessarily have to have the role of a detective to go through the trauma, unspooling your own trauma. That all being said, who was your favorite character to write, and who was probably, the hardest or the most difficult to write?
I mean, for some reason, I just seem to really enjoy writing like these really tall, handsome men, which my husband, who's my height, can't stand. It's just like, why do your male heroes have to be a foot taller than me? But I don't know. I think for some reason, I've always been, I hesitate to say a stronger writer when it comes to the male characters. I think maybe there's not as much. When you're a writer, there's this part of you that wants to inject yourself into the characters, and a part of you that says, no, they're completely different. And I think when I'm writing from the protagonist, or in both cases, they were female protagonists, from their point of view, I have found that I tend to create maybe a little bit too much distance from the character because I don't want it to be me. But then, of course, as the writer, part of you is going to come through. Whereas with Colin from my first book and Hux, for sure, I feel like I just have this freedom to just, whoever they want to be, and it feels a lot more natural in some sense. So I think that's just something that I've encountered in my writing journey, and something that comes up again in every book. But yeah, certainly Colin from the first book and Hux in the second book, I know they are just like these, perfect guys. They're not, they're flawed. But I'm just like, you know what, it is what it is. And I enjoy
But it almost
writing
makes
it
them
so
a little
much.
more perfect that I feel like I was super attracted, to but as much as I can, like this idea I had of them on my mind, it was like the wounded bad boy, where it was like, they weren't too perfect or the golden boy, and they kind of had their flaws like already on their sleeve, and they were like coming to terms with them on the page, as opposed to like some seriously, some things were repressed, but they were also like in the throes of dealing with trauma, which I think was really important too. Like we see a lot of male characters who have dealt with trauma in the past are going to be dealing with it, but to actually be like in the present and working through it as it relates to their relationships with other characters, I think that that's really special. And I think that's kind of what makes them more attractive to, maybe from a female, it's like that, brings you a level of humanity. And I think that, we wish, maybe just me, at least I wish that more people, not even men in general, like just people in general were like that and able to be more, honest with their flaws, but in a perfect world.
Yeah. No, you make a really good point. I think that's how I kind of feel about those characters too. They have to have something that makes them vulnerable, relatable, some flaw, and that makes them more human. You're right.
So I don't want to talk, too much about the actual mystery and give you, there's a mystery. People, I don't want to spoil too much for those who haven't read it, but I'm just going to throw out, there's some red herrings, like the Woodsman, and there's some weird locals and Colton Dodger, which is just like the best name ever. So how much do you think that we should, as a writer, give to an audience in advance? And how much do you feel like you want to let them put together the puzzles, where it's sort of like spoon feeding them, either if it's red herrings or something that actually is important to the central mystery?
Yeah, I think it's good to give the reader a lot of credit. And so kind of skirting that line between, you don't want to confuse the reader, but you do want to keep things mysterious. I try to push that line a little bit. And, I think it's fun to be reading a book and kind of thinking through what could be happening. I mean, as someone who's always been interested in mysteries and true crime, I think my thought process goes to, well, could it be this, or what about this, and theorizing. And I like to give the reader the opportunity to do that. So I think in that sense, it's a little bit, the traditional structure came into this novel in some ways. I mean, I certainly grew up reading a lot of Mary Higgins Clark, where it's just kind of like, well, there's 10 characters who did it.
Right.
And I think that's fun. I mean, I think that's, I've always enjoyed that, but I also like a really twisty story. And I think with Vanishing Edge, I really tried to make it twisty and interesting. I mean, for me, I have a pretty short attention span. I know readers have a lot of choice. So it's kind of like, keep it moving. I think that's my approach a little bit when I'm writing.
And you talked about this a little earlier, but like, how much of the plot is outlined in advance when you are sort of starting out with an idea? And is there anything that like you can point out that wasn't specifically planned, or any, plot twists or characters that weren't there in the beginning that you sort of discovered along the way?
Yeah, I mean, the big one, as I mentioned, is that it was completely set in the Bay Area at this evil startup company.
So it wasn't like, it was just like almost like a Theranos, like that kind of scam vibe, as opposed to the like wilderness vibe. Interesting. So was that a publishing decision that had you change that, or it just wasn't working in the story, or why did it shift like that?
When I started querying agents with this novel, that was the structure. And I had a couple agents that came back with feedback for me, and I just decided, they gave me great feedback, but in reading over their feedback, I just decided to kind of scrap the whole story and take it somewhere else. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was a national park element, but it wasn't as significant. And I mean, it was significant in a different way, because I certainly had always started with them being part of ISB, like the branch that they're with. But I think I have a natural tendency in some sense to explore places that I know, or things that are kind of on my mind. And as you mentioned, yes, Casey is she's my sister-in-law. So I've definitely spent time in LA. And I just think that world has always fascinated me. I just kind of wanted to explore that part of it a little bit and have them go to LA and have that be part of the kind of one facet of the story. And so that definitely developed a little bit later. Mm-hmm. And yeah, some of the twists came through with additional revisions where I'll just kind of flesh out different characters and make them a little bit more viable as suspects. Because to answer your question about outlining, I don't do any. I really try, and it just goes out the window within like the first sentence.
Yeah, especially with mystery books, because it's like, you want, or thriller, with that element, it's like you can plan it, but if you have a character make one decision, it might just change everything and derail everything, which is what I love about thrillers and mysteries. It's like every choice really is intentional, whether it means to be or not.
Yes, and that's what makes it so painful when you're when you're not an outline.
I imagine. I can only imagine. It's crazy, but it worked out in the end. So you at
yes,
least
it somehow miraculously came together in the end, but it's many rounds of revision to get there.
I'm sure. But I think anyone, if you write a book on your first try and you don't have any edits, like you're some sort of weird genius. I mean, that's almost like unheard of.
Yeah, I mean, years ago, I went to this talk at the Philadelphia Library, and Lee Child, who wrote all the Reacher books, was there. And he says he writes like a car, he can see about as far as the headlights are in front of him on a dark road. And I just took so much comfort in that, because I was like, well, I do it that way too, and he's doing fine. So right. I'm just going to go with that.
Oh, I like that a lot too. That's, good. It's like the more you plan, was it man has plans and God laughs or whatever. And that is kind of true, that like you can have it planned all out. And maybe if it's more of like a character study piece or more of like, domestic family drama, who even knows, but I feel like it's probably still going to go in however different ways. And speaking of all that, so how do you balance the different elements of this book? Because you're right, it's not just the national parks mystery. There's the element of satire with the Los Angeles world, which I live in Los Angeles, so I appreciated all of this because it's pretty accurate. I mean, I try to stay away from a lot of that, but I mean, there's stereotypes for a reason, and a lot of that world exists. And it's just sort of like, if you're on the periphery, you're like, what is going on? Because you see it, but you're like, how do these people live this way? So how do you balance that sort of and also, there's the off the grid people who we also, I forget their names, but they're a little bit satirized. And of course there's the glampist, which is, I love them too. So how do you, or do you pull from real life situations? I know you mentioned that a little bit, or do you like to sort of take more fictional liberties? Like, how do you balance all the different tones?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think I come from a place of, you have to be able to make fun of yourself. And luckily, my husband's side of the family living in LA, they're all funny people. So of course, when I was writing about it, I was like, are they going to be mad at me for writing like this? But no, they just thought it was funny. And I think deep down, I set the book partly there because I'm just intrigued by so many different sides of life in both a national park and a place like Los Angeles. Like, there's so much layering there. And I mean, it's easy to paint a place with a broad brush, but when you dig in a little bit deeper, you can that for me, it's you can find the individual in a place, and it might not have anything to do with your perception of that place. And I think humor just gives me the license to do that. For everything I write, there's always humor in it, because I just think that makes it more fun. And if I take myself too seriously, I'm not that good a writer to get away with that. And it's kind of like my take on it. It's kind of like, hey, this is kind of fun and breezy, so enjoy it. And that's really my goal is to, inject some levity into my writing and into my book, so that people feel like it's more grounded in real life, is where that comes from. But absolutely, as a writer, you just put something out into the world and you hope people kind of get it. And if they don't, and that's okay too. And that's part of the fun of it, I think.
Yeah. Speaking of fun, I guess, do you have any crazy personal horror wilderness stories that have happened to you? Like, was there anything specifically that, that happened to you that came onto the page, or was it all sort of just like from other people's experiences?
Let's see. A long time ago. Well, 100 years ago when I was in college. Basically, I was in Colorado. Like, this was my first real exposure to camping. As a kid, my family was not a camping family. We didn't go outside and do things like that.
Yeah.
It was.
I feel like if you don't grow up with it, it's pretty hard. I mean, plenty of people, I'm sure, find it later in life, but it is that sort of thing where it's like, if you grew up doing it as a kid, you love it. If not, it's a little bit harder to make that adjustment of like literally sleeping outside with bears and no electricity and all that fun stuff.
That is so true. I found it really jarring and just hard to, like, I had friends and I had a boyfriend in college that had just grown up doing that in Colorado. And we had made plans to climb like a 14er in Colorado, which is one of the taller mountains there. I was like, okay, that sounds
Like
great. He's like,
14
"Well,
miles? Or
14, 14,000 feet
oh, so
is
how
just their
many?
lingo for the
See, I don't
tall
even know what that
mountains.
means.
I had no idea either. I was like, a 14 what? But it means there are a number of mountains in Colorado that are above 14,000 feet, which is considered high.
Okay.
And he said, well, we have to leave at 4 a.m. or like, we're going to get struck by lightning. And I was just like, that
What?
sounds a little extreme, but all right, fine. And sure enough, like we left at, I think 5 a.m. and we got stuck in a lightning storm, like at the summit.
Oh my God.
And I just remember sprinting down the mountain. I was so terrified. I thought because we were above the tree line.
Right.
So there was just nothing out there. And I thought, oh, well, we could die out here. I mean, I should have paid closer attention to that warning. And I think since then, I've just always been fascinated in a way by respecting nature and how unpredictable it can be. I mean, as a mystery writer, there's a bit of a dark fascination with it, but I think experiencing it that time really brought it close. So I was like, oh, this could actually happen. And I didn't think I was being that careless. So I think that comes into my writing a little bit. In the national parks, just there's so many avenues to explore that. But yeah, I didn't grow up camping and I never really got used to it. And I think that's why I'm still scared of nature.
Yeah. I mean, it's ultimately, you're right. It's like, even if you're super prepared and you have everything, with you, it's like the ultimate mystery is like Mother Nature, and, things happen like the lightning. It's like, even if you didn't plan for it, it could have just happened and you're like at the mercy of it. Or I'm always, war is like a whole fascinating thing. Like my boyfriend loves war stuff. I had never really delved into it, but even like, I don't know if you've seen Band of Brothers, like that fascinated me of like, how do people, you're just an inch or not even an inch, like a centimeter to the left. And it's just sort of like the circumstance of life. But random tangent. But anyways, have you read the Lisa Scott? I think it's Lisa Gardner. She has this Frankie Elkin series, which is relatively new. There's a book called Before She Disappeared, which is also like about a young man who goes missing on like a bachelor trip in the national parks. And then she is hired as like a detective to go and look for them. And she's also young and like dealing with past trauma. And then of course there's series like Yellow Jackets. I don't know if you've seen that on Showtime, which is, about the girls who crash in the woods. There's also a series that came out on Amazon, I think a year or two ago, called The Wilds, about a group of young girls who are also trapped on an island. So I feel like, there's definitely like a larger cultural zeitgeist surrounding the fascination with nature, especially with women and nature. Do you feel like there is a need for like escapism going along with that in terms of, I feel like these have all sort of emerged. I'm sure they were planned pre-pandemic, but, the connection with nature and people inside, whether it's Los Angeles or any major city, like, do you feel like you have a place in this? I mean, of course you do in this larger cultural zeitgeist, but like, what do you think it says that we're so fascinated by returning to nature, and specifically the idea of like involuntarily being in nature and having to fight it rather than sort of living alongside it?
Yeah, I think you're right to bring up the pandemic as adding.
I hate to say it, but we got to talk about it at some point. Right?
Yeah, no, you're completely right. And I think it gives people an appetite for kind of broadening their comfort zone, which has become, just gets small by nature when you're stuck inside or you're in quarantine or there's not your usual activities aren't available to you. So I think for me, I mean, it was a little bit serendipitous. I started writing this before that all happened. But I think the national parks have been certainly gaining popularity. And I brought that into this book as, are they too popular, or is there, what are with climate change, like what are the not darker sides, but other sides to that popularity? I think it's amazing that we have national parks and people are free to explore them. But I think there's also just this, certainly in our culture, more of an awareness of the impact on our environment. And right. I think that's an important thing to investigate. And I hope that continues to come out in these stories. But as to why there's always been this fascination with nature and survival. I mean, for me, it's just always there. I mean, if there's a plane crash in the woods, the show about that, well, I'm going to watch that. Like, yeah, I'm there. So I don't know. For me, it's kind of, if something feels close to home, in that it could happen to me,
Oh.
but it also feels really scary. I tend to be drawn to those. I love survivor stories. I think because I know that I would last about 5 minutes in an apocalypse. So I really enjoy just like diving in and seeing what brings people together and what brings out the worst in other people. I just find that really an interesting side of psychology too.
Right. And especially, it brings back that primal nature to be literally you're in where humanity started. And it really that fight or flight instinct that so many people kind of peacefully get to ignore or blissfully ignorant, we get to ignore it in the real world. So when you're put into the situation of really that animalistic, it shows who you are. And it's like, I don't think I would survive even 5 minutes. Like, but then sometimes you surprise yourself and then you do things that it is really life, the survival aspect too, which brings us into, I want to talk a little bit about your first novel, Girl Underwater, which is much more, of a survival story. It's about a young girl or a young woman who survives a plane crash. And what I found really fascinating about it is, she survives because it's told in this dual timeline of her, dealing with the actual plane crash in real time, similar to, it's very similar to Yellow Jackets that came out before. So you get the OG dual timeline narrative that goes to you. But the first thing I want to talk about is I'm actually from Boston. So right around the Cambridge area. So the specificity of place again, did you live in Boston at all? Did you do research? Because like Anna's Taqueria, my favorite burrito place, like seeing that on the page, I was like, oh my gosh, like it's like the really little details too. But it's like when you take, a place that does exist in an actual neighborhood and a place that's very popular and you also like make it it's perfect. It's like, it was the perfect setting for the situation and the incident and for what she experiences there. Like, so I guess that's my first question is what's your connection to Boston and what made you choose to put those specific places on the page?
Yes, I think as is true for maybe some writers, Girl Underwater had a lot of autobiographical elements in it and a lot that weren't. I mean, certainly not. But I did live in Boston for a couple of years after college and I loved it so much. I feel like it's just it's an awesome city. It has its own character and it really kind of inspired me as a writer. So I definitely wanted that to be like a crucial part of the story. And I think when I was writing it, I was grappling a little bit with the fact that I never felt quite as at home in the Bay Area. And so it felt in a way like a natural place to draw from. I mean, that was emotionally true. So I think when you're, for me when I was, well, I had written a couple of things before that, but I hadn't been published before that. I found it easier to just draw from a real place and literally a real place, but also from a real emotional place and just kind of lay it out there as this is what I experienced. And certainly didn't experience a plane crash, but I think just trying to draw on as many experiences as I could and put them into the novel because I went to that burrito place so many times and it was so vivid in my memory. I was like, this is going in there.
Yeah, I'm actually going back next weekend. I'm actually going to Aruba with my family, but I'm stopping in Boston and I'm like, I need to go to Anna's. Like, that's my thing is because even living in Los Angeles, we have good Mexican food, but there's something about like the way they steam the burritos with the cheese. This is like super specific, but maybe I think a lot of my listeners are my friends who are from Boston, so they know. But like the steaming the burrito with the cheese, like you can't get that anywhere else. And it is such like a landmark too. And I think a lot of people, if you're from that area, even if you haven't been there, like, it. And that's how I feel about like a lot of things in Los Angeles is like, I haven't necessarily been to a lot of those places, but like, I totally know it, or it's easy to satirize some of those places. So also, there's the intertwining of the rescue story and the sort of overcoming trauma, but there's also that really beautiful love story that I think is a little more, present than the other. There is definitely romantic tension and I am rooting for our main characters in Vanishing Edge, but how did you explore that love story and how did you balance the romance with the personal development as well as, ultimately there is a survival story with the young boys as well. So how did you, intertwine all those different genres?
Yeah, that book also went through some changes during the course of revisions. Like initially it was mostly a romance, like that was the core of it. I mean, it wasn't written as a traditional romance, but it was really about those two characters. And so during the process of revision, both my agent and my editor had, said, well, can you increase the survival, like action aspect of it? And then what about dual timelines? And can we play with that a little bit? So it definitely changed shape over the course of the story, but it really started as an exploration of this relationship between two kind of reluctant characters who ended up having more in common than they thought. And they needed each other in a way that wasn't like codependency. It was just helping each other find what they really wanted and didn't know what they wanted. And so I think that was I just kind of wanted to explore two people coming from two different places at a vulnerable point in their lives. And so that's really where it started. The survival element was amped up through multiple revisions, which I think strengthened the story in a different way. But I think when I read reviews, I notice, oh, I thought this was going to be kind of like a hardcore survivor book, and it wasn't, but that's okay. I still really like the romance. I think is kind of where it ended up, and I'm happy with that. Like, I think that's kind of the book I wanted to be.
And I mean, I guess I'll spoil a little bit too. Is that sort of where it comes along with the decision to not really explore? We know she is saved. We see her that moment, like right before she's kind of saved, but we don't fully fill in the picture between like how were the rest of the people say, we don't see that actual moment. Like we see her we know she's saved, and then we see her basically in the hospital. And does that sort of go along with that too, where it's like, that piece itself isn't as important as like the lasting impacts of what happened after. And it almost would have given us too much. Like, it's kind of nice to also think about it in your own way as a reader of what sort of to fill in the pieces between what happened to get her to where she is. Like, was that intentional, I'm assuming?
Yeah, that was intentional. I think the timeline shift, I tried to sync up the chapters a little bit with, like the present and the past. They had some connection, and organically in the initial drafts, it fortunately kind of worked out that way. I just had to rearrange some of the story. But I think some of the suspense, because if you know that she survived from the beginning, you could argue, well, where is the suspense in that? Right. So I think you have to find tension in some other ways. And that's where the romance came in. And, how did her story develop and how did she recover from this trauma? So I think that just forced me to really focus on that. And that was certainly part of it.
And so can you talk a little bit more about what it was like once you released your first book into the world and the engagement in the literary community, and, how you sort of avoided the dreaded sophomore slump? Because I would argue that, they're both fantastic, equally weighted books, and I don't think one is better than the other. And I know that a lot of people feel like they have like these high expectations when they're publishing their second novel, and they feel like, they have to surpass the first one. And I think that, you did a great job of balancing both of them and bringing in new information. And I think, it reads, how did you manage your success, I guess? And like dealing with, you have a Jodi Picoult blurb on your first novel, like that's fantastic. Like, how did you sort of navigate all of that?
Well, first of all, Jodi was very gracious. I emailed her and she was kind enough to give me a blurb. So I'm very grateful to her and to
I love her. She is such a great, I can see some of her work in she's like the ultimate at like blending genres and twists and turns and like romance, but also like survival or like something, in the zeitgeist of the culture. It's like amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always, it's super inspirational when you can kind of veer out of your own genre and, try something new and experiment. So I was very fortunate there. I think my journey has been a little bumpy, to be honest. When I published that first book in 2015, I didn't know what was going to come next. And I had some stops and starts, and I was working with my agent at that time, and it felt like I couldn't write anything that really resonated with her. And I thought, oh, maybe this isn't for me, or I didn't know what to do. It was hard. And I was finishing residency. And so I took a couple breaks in there. And then finally I decided to part ways with my agent at the time, because I thought, well, maybe I just need a fresh start. She's a great agent. I have nothing against her. It was more just me. And that's how I just decided I'm going to write what I feel like writing about. I'm not going to worry about anything else. And that's what led to this book. And, I think that was really freeing and really helped me, because once it was done, I had to go back and query it all over again. And that was hard. But for me, it's always been about you can chase trends and try to be popular and try to fit into some box. But for me, it's about going back to the enthusiasm of writing and finding something that really makes me excited to sit down and write, because it's really hard. I have some days where I'm just like, I don't know if I can get through this. But I really, like, deep down, I really enjoy it. But when you get to some hurdles in there, or you feel like you're not going to get published or you're not successful, then it's easy to feel like you want to give up. So I think this book just came out of, I really love writing. I want to get back into it. And I was fortunate enough to find an agent who championed it and a publisher who took it. So I kind of just stuck with it, I'd say.
Yeah, like how do you quiet those doubts? I'm sure everyone, when they're writing something, feels this sense of, am I going to fail? How am I going to keep going? Like, how do you personally sort of fight through that? And are there any tips you want to share that you think could help other writers or listeners who are feeling kind of stuck? And maybe just in anything creatively, it doesn't even have to be writing, but like, how do you push through that? Especially, you are a physician as well, and you have another high, so you're not just writing full time. You've got a whole other, I'm sure, insane, crazy career. So how do you navigate all that? Any tips you want to share with, because you seem to have at least, done it pretty well so far. So objectively, so.
I would say you really have to enjoy the thing. Because I think if you get caught up in these goals or, certain standards or comparing yourself to other people, I think you can get lost in that. And even if you have this great success and you don't enjoy what you're doing, it's not going to bring you joy. So it sounds, I don't know, maybe it sounds simple, but I think it's if you really love writing, then it's kind of easy to stick with it and just experiment, try different genres, write what inspires you. That's kind of what I have stuck with. And absolutely, there are ups and downs. There are times where I'm just like, I'm never going to make it. I have books published and that's great, but I'm never going to be a mega bestseller, or these doubts will creep in, or this will never happen. But it really just comes down to, it doesn't matter what's going on out there. Am I enjoying the process? And are people reading my books and enjoying them? And if that's the answer, then that's it. I'm just so pleased with that. I'm like so pleased when anyone emails me or leaves a review or spent 5 hours reading my book, it just escaped into it. That's just amazing. I feel I'm thrilled by that. And that's why I go back and write another book, even though they're really hard to write.
Well, I appreciate them, and I'm sure, plenty of others do. So thank you for pushing through it. We're going to end with some more fun, lighter questions. I'm sure you get this question all the time, but if you could cast your dream cast for both of these books, Avery and Colin and Felicity and Hux, do you have any in mind that you would, whether it was a TV show or a, mini series or a film, who would you like them to play?
Ooh, that is a tough one.
Or if you don't know, that's totally fine. Because there's so many, even people are like, who are your favorite actors? I'm like, I don't know. But then I'll watch them and be like, oh yeah, I really liked that part. It's hard. There's so many that it's hard to keep track of.
I think I have thought about this. I think for me, for Girl Underwater, I would want two actors that pass as swimmers. And they're kind of hard to find. Like, collegiate swimmers are built a different way.
They're not like the Hollywood body standard by any means.
Yeah, they tend to be big. They tend to be, they're not all big, but like tall. The men are
broad-shouldered. Yeah.
Broad shoulders. I think for me, if they could find someone that has that physicality, that would be ideal. I don't know who that would be. I'd have to
the young, because they're younger too. So it's like the new generation of teen actors is like, I don't even know. I don't even like who I would think of. They'd probably be too old at this, although sometimes they cast 30-year-olds as, there's that. I don't know if you've watched Euphoria at all. That's the big teen show. There's probably some people in there that, what's his face? Nate, even though he's not the best character, he's that Jacob Elordi, I think is his name, is the actor. But, and so what are some of your, inspirations that obviously I'm sure you love true crime and horror? What sort of inspired you? And even if it didn't inspire you, what are some of your favorites? Or, do you have a favorite murder? Do you listen to the podcast?
Yeah, I listen to so many true crime podcasts. I'm definitely I've always been fascinated by true crime. I grew up reading Anne Rule books. She was a big true crime writer. And I certainly read a lot of Stephen King, Dennis Lehane. And yeah, I think, they're good writers and they're good storytellers. When I sit down to read a book or watch a movie, like I'm really looking for two things. Am I going to be entertained, and do I have some emotional connection to the story? Uh-huh. And if that happens, then I'm into it. Like I'm here for the ride. So anything in that realm, really, I'm always open to new things. I love, I'm really into like it certainly has the survival aspect, but post-apocalyptic stuff. Yeah. I've always been drawn to that. So if there's ever a good like survivor story or series or with a sci-fi element, I'm into that too. So yeah, it really runs the gamut. I think I'm
but no, I think that's a good point about the emotional connection too, because it doesn't even have to be like, you don't even have to like the characters. Like you don't have to agree with what they're doing or their decisions, but you still have to like, there's that anti-hero, of course, but like the emotional investment, like you still care what they're doing, even if you know that you don't like them. So I find that fascinating. What are some of your favorite, like detectives from history? Was there any ones that you specifically pulled from to inspire, especially like the Felicity and Hux pairing, or did you kind of just like pull off just amalgamations of other things?
Oh, that's a good question. I
mean, obviously there's like Mulder and Scully, but like, everyone's influenced by the X-Files. I don't know. I sort of thought even of like the Odd Couple pairing. I mean, it's a little different, but I don't know if you watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine, like Hitchcock and Scully, there's like, and whenever there's like an odd couple of detectives put together, I just find it like, I find that hilarious. Like, I don't want the 2-season professional, you want or maybe you want 1-season professional, but then you also want someone who has dealing with this back injury and has gone through some serious trauma and is a little bit of a firecracker. Like you want the Odd Couple pairing.
Yeah. I definitely find those books and those series really interesting. I mean, when you're just not quite sure how it works, but it does work.
Right. And it doesn't have to be detectives. Like it could just, even if it's like an old man, we just watched The Temple of Doom again last night. You're like Short Round and Indiana Jones. You're like, how does it make sense that this like 10-year-old kid from China is like helping Indiana Jones, but it like works, like it doesn't even make sense, but it works. Like, and then there's other times when it doesn't work, but I think you're right. It's the emotional connection too, which is really what comes across. So before we wrap up, can you talk a little bit about An Unforgiving Place at all? Is that already finished? Your next book that's coming out? What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, I just finished the main edits on it. So there's a couple rounds with the publisher. So it's with the publisher now. And this one is set in Gates of the Arctic National Park, which is one of probably the least visited park in the US, but it's up near the Arctic Circle. It's in Alaska.
Oh.
And there's a little bit of a cult element to it, but it's, there's a little bit of undercover work. So there's a little bit of a interesting dynamic between Harlan and Hux going into that kind of environment. But it also, there's another disappearance and another potential murder.
That's what I like too, is you don't even know if they're actually dead when it starts. And that's what's cool too, is like, again, even if you know maybe what happened, like maybe you find out at some point they are alive or they're not alive. I won't spoil it, but it's like, again, you get part of the mystery, but you want to know why it happened. That's what I love too about your books. And I'm sure all the things that you watch and have been inspired by, it's like, even I think going back to Hitchcock, where it's like, you can know what happens, but you don't know why it happens or how you're going to get there. And that's what keeps people. And you're right, there's so much out there that I think the fact that you're able to continue this as a series too, and bring back these characters that people are invested in, I hope will definitely bring more readers to the series. I think that was a smart decision to continue their story. And I definitely, I love Vanishing Falls. I would have read whatever you put out after anyways, but knowing that it's like these characters that I'm already sort of knowing, but I get to know more of their story too. Like, and will they get together romantically? I'm invested in that part too. I know you probably can't say anything, but don't tell me even if
I won't say anything.
Don't say anything. And final question, what are you reading now? What have you read recently? Anything that is struck your mind or that you want to recommend?
Yeah, the most recent book I read was I'm blanking on the title, but Andy Weir's most recent book.
I can look it up.
Follow Up to The Martian.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm blanking on the title. Is Project Hail Mary.
Yes, you're
That was
right.
yeah.
Yes.
No, I just had to look it up. I didn't remember it. Don't. Google told me, not my mind.
Yes, I was intrigued by that, so I did read that one. And I'm reading a couple books. There's one, 48 Hours to Kill is what I'm reading now by Andrew Burrell. He's with my publisher too, really talented writer. So I'm really enjoying that.
Well, I haven't heard of this one, but now I want to add it to my to be read list. Has he written other stuff too?
He's
Andrew
written
Brown.
short stories,
Okay,
I think,
cool.
or just collaborations, but this was his.
Okay, I'm definitely adding this to my to be read. Even just that title sounds really cool too. Like I like that title.
I have these like niche areas, like, oh, it's about an ex-con. I'm in for that.
Right.
Or there's a timeline. I'm in for that. So there are things that I'm certainly drawn to as a reader. But I definitely go all over the place. Another one I really liked was Max Brooks' Devolution, the follow-up to World War Z. I really love that.
Yes, that's that about the Bigfoot phenomenon, sort of. Right. These are all books that are like on my list, but I need to
really
read
like that one a lot. That was very good.
I'm sure there's probably also a lot of parallels between your writing and that as well, even though it's more nonfiction, but sure.
Yeah, it's kind of that. It's his writing style is something, when you're reading good writers, you're like, oh, this is how they do that. And it's always
right. You're like, I wish I could have said it that way. Or like, especially when you read a line that you're like, wow, like that's how I feel. And I wish I could have just put that into words. But they did. So good for them.
Exactly. And then you just admire how they do it and you enjoy it. And that's
right. And I think every writer, is they wouldn't be where they are without everything that they've read before, which is why I love reading and why I think more people should continue reading, because, I dabble in my own writing, but I'm not trying to like publish anything by any means. I think it's just more like, I appreciate the art so much that I'm like, why not dabble in it? But to have written 2 fantastic novels and have more on the way, you're amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I'm sure myself and my readers have learned a lot, and we will link your books below so everyone can buy them. And thank you again. And until next time, everyone, stay reading.